So now we go to the second session, and we wait for our speaker there, please. Is Wendy online?
Yes, I'm
Yes.
here, James.
Oh, howdy. Hi, Wendy. How nice to see you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Sure.
It's a real pleasure to welcome you to TPN platform. It may be slightly surprising that you have me to chair, because it was Katy Perry, our chairman of our parliamentary committee, who was destined to be with us this morning. But regrettably, she was taken ill this morning. And so in the work of things, people thought it would be easiest that I would then continue to chair this. As we've known each other for as long as I care to think, at least into the last millennium, it's a great pleasure to be able to introduce this debate and then set the conversation going. Because in terms of the way in which you have been able to handle so many different issues, I've always had a great admiration for your verve and the success with which you've done them. You worked in a variety of positions in both government and non-government organizations. As a diplomat, you served in the 90s under Warren Christopher as Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs, and then as Madeleine Albright's counselor in the following decade. You returned to the State Department after having been vice chair of the Albright Stonebridge Group in 2011 as Undersecretary for State for Political Affairs, leading the US team during the negotiations on Iran. And we'd like to hear during our question and answer, I think, what your take of that particular issue is today. But you are now director of the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard University School, Kennedy School. So what a remarkable and varied career that you've had, Wendy, I'd say so far. We never know what will happen next. But I think for what's going to happen next is to ask you to make a few opening comments on the question that we have in front of us, which is really, how do we now get on track for the Transatlantic Partnership? It's our theme, and we've had two remarkably clear statements in our beginning session. But I think that this session is a question and answer session. But if you'd like to say a few words to begin with, please, Wendy, do. And then I'll follow up with a few questions before opening this out to everyone online. Great. Wendy, over to you, please.
Well, it's terrific to be here with everybody this morning. And indeed, this relationship goes very far back. So it's great to see you, James. And I hope that your colleague feels better soon. It's hard to be ill during this time of COVID, no matter what the illness, and I hope she recovers quickly. But good to be with you, to see Vivian, who I haven't seen in quite some time. And also to be very transparent, Bruce Stokes is on this Zoom with us, who has helped to author, led an authorship of a German Marshall Fund project on the transatlantic relationship. And for those who don't know, he's my husband and has thought more about the transatlantic relationship than I have. So I hope he pipes up whenever he chooses to. Look, we are at quite a complicated time here in the United States. I hope some of that complexity sort of fades away on January 21st, when Joe Biden is inaugurated as President of the United States and Kamala Harris as the Vice President. You all know Joe Biden. He is a transatlantic champion. He believes in the importance of this relationship and the centrality, quite frankly, of this relationship. You all know Tony Blinken, who is the designate to be Secretary of State. He, in fact, grew up in Paris and speaks virtually native French. His mother still lives in Paris. He's very committed to the transatlantic relationship and came up through European affairs and understanding that. So you've got folks at the top of this pyramid who completely are committed to rebuilding this alliance. As the president-elect has said, he wants to rebuild the alliances all around the world. The last opening point I want to make, which I think is fundamental for us and for you for that matter, is that Joe Biden constantly says America cannot just be about the example of our power, but must be about the power of our example. And what he means by that is that America has to restore its credibility. by getting control of the COVID crisis in the United States, which is surging way out of control, by rebuilding the economy and an economy for the future, renewable energy, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, technology, the jobs of the future, and to do so in a way that is just, that addresses the disparities in our society, and finally, to renew democracy by revaluing our institutions, reforming them where they must be, but really moving forward in a new way, understanding that 2021 is not 2016, it's not 2008, it's not 2012. So I think we all have these kinds of challenges in front of us, and the president-elect is quite conscious of what America needs to do to put its house together, to have credibility in the world stage, and to renew its partnership with Europe.
Wendy, thank you very much indeed for that opening statement. It is positive for a transatlanticist like myself, and no doubt for many others, to be able to have this kind of conversation. Even a month ago seemed to be impossible, but now it's so kind of warm and welcoming. So my first question is, you will have seen that Commissioner von der Leyen has said that this is now a opportunity for a once-in-a-generation to redesign a new transatlantic agenda for global cooperation based on common values, interests, and global influence. Do you think that this sense of scale of the possible opportunity and sense is there for us to do this?
I do think there is the energy and the will to do this. I would point out the study that Bruce just led is very much in concert with the EU document. So I think there's been a lot of conversation. There's a project at Harvard looking at the transatlantic relationship coming down in virtually the same place. So yes, I do think there's a common agenda, and the issues that you all have put on the agenda for this conference are the ones that we are all focused on: digital economy, climate, and security, and the politics of this relationship. So yes, I think we have much work to do together. Some of it's quite difficult. We shouldn't be too Pollyannish about where we agree on everything. There are some places where we are going to have to work with each other to build on the common ground that we have and deal with some tough issues.
Do you get any sense of the issues which you think might be the easiest ones to deal with? We're getting a sense that the big kind of projects of a TTIP is not likely to be taken up by an incoming administration. And therefore this sense, I think it was Knut saying, taking small steps at a time. Where are the areas you think that over the next 12 or 18 months, we could make the most progress so as to, if you like, get a momentum as we move into this new decade?
Well, I think we all have to look ahead, because every country is going to be relatively internally focused in the short term. Internally focused to deal with COVID, internally focused to deal with their economies. You all have lived through the Trump era of saying that every country should meet the 2% target commitment that was made in NATO. That's going to be really hard to do because economies are very constrained. So can we focus on research and development? Can we look at that research and development as a basis for where we go with technology and the future of technology? So we have a short-term challenge that will be very internal, but a medium and longer term challenge to think ahead about what we can do together. I certainly think climate is an area in which we should work together. Digital is certainly but more difficult, but critical. I think there will be an enormous focus on technology in the United States, as there is in Europe. You all have moved ahead on issues around privacy. The OECD is still struggling with the issue of taxation, around which we have differences. So we're going to have to work through those. But I would say issues of climate, issues of security, long-term economic challenges. I quite agree. I don't think any trade agreement is on the short-term or maybe even medium-term agenda. because we all are so internally focused in the short and maybe even in the medium term. But we should all imagine the future. And then the last point I want to make, which is going to be quite central for Tony Blinken, for the president, is China. I remember a meeting with TPN maybe 2 decades ago, where I raised China, and quite frankly, you all looked at me like I was crazy. And today, Europe well understands that we have to be able to compete with China. We have to be able to challenge China where we must, and we have to find the areas of cooperation. We will only be able to do what we need to do if we do it together. And so plotting out what that agenda is and how to move forward on it, I think will be absolutely crucial. You're on mute, James.
No, I'm now unmuted. The chairman is allowed to speak, we're just trying to cut out any kind of unnecessary noise, I think, in the system. I mean, China is obviously a very interesting area to be looking at, as the European views, as you know, are shifting on this particular issue. So how do you see that this is going to play out? Is it that the strategy will still be the same, to try and bring China and to have some kind of transatlantic means of bringing it into a multilateral system, but therefore slightly maybe less aggressive than under the Trump system? Is it more a tactical kind of approach? How do you see this working out? How can Europeans be most helpful in this area?
I think this has to be a strategic approach. I think part of the problem of Trump is that tariffs are a tactic. It is not a strategy. The president-elect has said that he is not going to remove them right away. He wants to look at the whole landscape and decide how we should move forward. I think it needs to be done in close consultation with Europe, because we will be strongest if we plot out this strategy and use the tools in the toolboxes that we both have to deal with China. Together, we are much stronger than if we try to do this apart. Now, we have some differences. We saw those around Huawei and what security is all about. We're going to have to work through that to figure out what we do and how we do it. But China is a huge issue for all of us when it comes to the economy, when it comes to who owns the technological future, when it comes to security. We all have to think through Chinese modernization of their military and what that means for all of us and for our future security. So I think that each of us will be thinking about this and are now, but we need to bring our ideas together and try to move forward together.
Well, thank you for that clear kind of direction. Obviously, as most people focusing in towards 2030 know that China is going to be most likely the biggest economic power in the globe, we have a real transatlantic interest, I think, in working together as you have described. My last question before I open this out to the floor, and by the way, when you're wanting to speak, we've already got a couple. If you'd like to raise your hand or use the chat system, then we will do our best to provide you with the opportunity to give a question to Wendy. But Wendy, of course, it's Iran that I'd like to ask you about, because this is something which is so close, I suspect, to everything that you've been involved in, at least in the past decade, and you had huge responsibility for achieving what was a remarkable result at the time. How do you feel about this now, and how do you think that, given the recent events, that this issue can now be satisfactorily resolved?
Well, first of all, I want to thank Europe. The Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action would have disappeared completely a long time ago if it was not for Europe, for hanging together and trying to keep the deal going. So I'm immensely grateful for what European leaders did in this process. Secondly, the president-elect has said that if Iran comes back into compliance, that he wants to re-enter the JCPOA and then build on it. Most arms control agreements have a follow-on agreement. He wants to also, in parallel, work on the other issues of concern, malign behavior in the region, human rights abuses, missiles, putting Americans and Europeans in Evin prison, all of the issues. But he does believe that ensuring that Iran not obtain a nuclear weapon is priority number one, and he wants to make sure that goes back in a box. I think that when people talk about Iran, it's really as much about Iran's politics, if not more, than the rest of ours. Most of you know that Iran has a presidential election in June. I suspect the slate will be what I call the hardliners, the folks who won the parliamentary election last year and were allowed to run. They have been very tough, saying that Iran is going to move forward with its program, shouldn't re-enter the deal. There are other voices in Iran saying we must re-enter the deal. Zarif has said he's open to re-entering the deal if the US will remove the sanctions. This will really play out in Iranian politics. Iran's economy is devastated. The COVID surge is profound in Iran. So my sense is there is space to come back into the deal, but the window is very short and very narrow and very complicated. We saw this morning here in the United States an article about how, because of the bomb that went off in one of Iran's facilities, that they are building an underground facility in a mountain to assemble centrifuges. None of this is a surprise, considering what Trump has done. So again, complications, but in my view, does not foreclose diplomacy. And to begin that diplomacy, finally, begins with the United States sitting down with Europe, deciding on the best way forward. You all have fingertips about where everything is in a way that is far better than ours at the moment, because you have continued to have conversations with Iran and will do so again, I believe, on December 16th in Vienna. So consultations with Europe will be job number one.
Right. Well, thank you very much indeed for that wonderful opening and your so clear response to the questions which I've asked you. Now, I'd like to open it out to questions, if I might. Keep them, if you would, brief, and so we can then get us through as many questions as possible. But I'll take them one by one when I think it's easier that way, because otherwise, then if it's all together, then it's always maybe a little bit more difficult. So first up is Knut Fleckenstein. If you'd like to come on, now is your moment.
Thank you very much, James. Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
Nice
fine.
to see you. Welcome.
It's so encouraging what we hear from Jim and from Wendy. Thank you very much for the invitation today. I was 10 years member of the European Parliament and Foreign Affairs Coordinator, Vice President of the S&D Group. I'm watching the discussions and being part of the discussions here on the European side since November the 3rd. And we have a lot of expectations and hopes towards the new administration, the new president. But I think we should really start with discussing what we on the European side can deliver to that opportunity. And this is a bit shortcoming for my feeling. So my question would be, what do you in the United States expect from us? What kind of changes maybe are thinking to use the opportunity we all see, and we all are happy that we have them. Thanks, James.
Thank you very much, Wendy.
Thanks so much for that. I think that's really important. And this conference that you're having today, which is to sort of come up with what those ideas, what that agenda is, will be incredibly useful. I mean, all of the ways forward are not just going to come out of the United States. So your creativity around what the economy of the future would look like, your creativity about how to reaffirm democracy. Europe is facing your own challenges of of some countries in the European Union who, quite frankly, are challenging democracy in really profound ways, as profound as the craziness around our election. So ideas that you have about things that we need to do, you know that the president-elect wants to create a meeting of democracies. What should that look like? What are your ideas for that agenda, given your own experience? How do we move forward on climate, which Europe has been very aggressive about in some ways, more so than the United States? Technology is a place where we have differences, but you all have done a lot of thinking about how to manage privacy. We need to appreciate that most of the large technology companies are American. So the ideas that come from Europe cannot be perceived as anti-American, as somehow pushing back American companies. These are the companies that are the engines for all of us in liberal democracies for the future. Now, there are many ways we have to pull in those technology companies. Americans want some of those regulatory frameworks that don't currently exist. So let's share ideas and let's figure out the best way forward. I would just say, let's be careful that we don't trash each other inadvertently along the way as we figure out the best ways to build this future, which is going to be quite different than the economies we currently have.
Thank you very much indeed for that question and answer. I'd like to go to Megan Richard, who's asked a little bit before on this question, I think, of the recovery and energy and clean deal. Are you still online, Megan?
I'm online. Would you like me to speak? I thought you could read my nice little question, but I'm happy to speak out loud. So nice to hear you.
Well, it's better that you read out your own question than me read it out. So
okay, very good. Well, I'll modify it briefly to make it even clearer. I mean, we're very pleased, I think, by Joe Biden's green recovery and Build Back Better proposals, both from the executive actions that he proposes to take and also from the legislative side. And of course, these are very much in line with what the EU is doing. I'm just a bit worried about what I've heard so far. And of course, it's still very early days, but there seems to be a lot of backpedaling already from Republicans, from what I've heard and seen, on how to progress. And we have seen in Europe how beneficial these actions are in terms of job creation, in terms of sustainable development, in terms of improving the way the economy works. And so if this is beneficial and advantageous in Europe, it obviously should also be so in the United States. So do you think there's any potential for the Republicans to come around on some of those issues when they see the job creation potential and the ways in which existing jobs can be transformed into other actions? So that's, sorry, a little bit longer and more complicated than what I said. Now I'll disappear.
Well, thanks, Megan. Thank you.
So, look, we have very difficult politics in the United States. Those politics will get either better or stay as entrenched, in part depending upon what happens on January 5th in Georgia, in the election of 2 senators in a runoff. If the Democrats win those 2 Senate seats, they have control of the Senate and therefore the agenda and greater chance of getting some things done. If we don't win those 2 seats, then Mitch McConnell continues to control the agenda of the Senate, makes it more difficult. I heard the end of your last speaker before I came on, and I quite agree that intensifying the legislature to legislature dialogue is really critical, and to ensure that that includes Republicans as well as Democrats, because there are some Republicans who do care about climate, do care about the jobs of the future, see what's happening in their own communities. And if you can engage them in a conversation at the legislative level, that will be immensely helpful to the United States. So I do hope you do that and do it with great vigor. We need all the help we can get to help legislators in our Congress understand what the future demands.
Right. Well, now I think questions are coming as they always do, Wendy. They're thick and fast, and of course, as we now run for the line, I'd like to take Ambassador Lambrinidis, please. Next, please ask your question.
Thank you, James. Great to see you.
Very
Wendy,
nice
great to see you as well. I have to apologize. It's a very crazy period for me, so I had to jump in and out of this great discussion because I have to talk to Bob Menendez, the senator, in 10 minutes. But very quickly, I was really impressed and fully support Wendy's point that the EU should also be putting ideas on the agenda. That it's not just for the new administration to be coming up with stuff. And I wanted to just raise the fact that we just did so. So we put out a joint communication of the European Commission where we try to have a very concrete agenda on the 4 big baskets that the Biden administration is also going to be focusing on: COVID and the recovery, the environment, digital, trade, the economy, and of course the world and democracy. Some of them relate to how we work now to get COVID vaccines and treatments out, not just to our own people, but the rest of the world. The US joining the COVAX initiative would be humongously helpful in this sense. And we have to do this because this is geostrategic as well. We do see China going around the world acting like the new Mother Teresa, and it's not. We are the ones that can ensure that all these vaccines get out to people who need them. On the environment, we have suggested very concretely that we start a dedicated dialogue on an environmental tech alliance to be the first movers when it comes to the new technologies, whether it is storage on a grid-wide basis, which is going to be critical if we're going to be transitioning, or whether it is the new energy, clean energy technologies. In all these, remarkable investment is needed. Huge minds from across the Atlantic are already in the lead. And if we get together on this, we will also be able to support other countries transitioning. And that first mover advantage has great economic benefits as well. When it comes to trade, we want a Trade and Technology Council. We want to begin a conversation to work on everything we're already doing in a haphazard way. Who sets the standards on AI? How do we cooperate on investment screening? What do we do with countries that are trying to export their values together with their technologies? And how do we win that battle? And of course, when it comes to democracy, the Summit for Democracy that the President-elect has suggested is something we fully support. These are 4 out of around 35 very concrete recommendations. Please read that joint communication, all of you, if you haven't yet.
Ist das jetzt das Mikrofon auf oder ist es nur die Anfrage?
And we are super open to discussing how it is that we can prioritize those things and make them happen. Because we have a new US under Biden, a US that is totally committed to Europe and to alliances. We have a new Europe today that is much more confident, much stronger, more united in the world. We did have to play defense for the past 4 years, but now we can move on to playing offense together without being offensive to anyone. But that's something that we can do. The world needs leadership. We have the leverage to achieve it. So you know what? I can sit back and start whining about this and that we disagree on, and we do, and we have to deal with the Airbus and Boeings, and we have to deal with the digital services taxes, and we have to do it fast. But I'm supremely optimistic, and I assure you that we are out there, as Wendy suggested, for the past, I don't even remember how many weeks, every day with tens of congressmen, senators, think tankers, others, promoting this agenda. We're not going to miss this historical crossroads. We're not missing this opportunity. So thank you.
Great. Stavros, thank you very much indeed for that great clarity about the new agenda for global change. What I'd like to do is, we have only a short time left, is to take a few questions, and Wendy, you can then respond to them so everybody feels that they've had their opportunity to say something, at least who've actually asked, that I have a record of who wants to ask us. So there's Alexis Safati, please, first, followed by Paul Nemitz.
Great, thank you so much, James, and thank you, Wendy, as well for the discussion. The ambassador just touched on my initial question, but I did want to get your thoughts. You mentioned China earlier and your prescient warnings many years ago to this group, but as the ambassador just touched on, the EU had recently proposed and this week will unveil more formally, its strategy around a kind of reinvigorated, almost post-Trump alliance with the US, specifically to, in many ways, counter China jointly. It is focused quite heavily on digital regulation and the digital economy, but touches on a slew of issues, COVID-19, sustainability, et cetera. And I guess I'm just curious as to your thoughts on the receptivity of the Biden administration to fully engage with the EU, and perhaps even more broadly in a broader kind of coalition of democracies of sorts, countering China going forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Alexis. I'll take 3 more, if I may, Wendy, and then we'll come back to you to make some closing comments. So next is Paul Nemitz, please, followed by Adam Isaacs.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. How likely is it that the new government is able to introduce asymmetric relation of the digital economy? I think we share the issues, as you said, also in the United States. Many businesses and people in Congress are very unhappy with the dominance of a few firms and a few social networks. So all the discussions about Article 230, the platform liability privilege, and of course, privacy. Obama tried twice to introduce a baseline privacy act and failed twice in Congress. How likely is President Biden to get through with such initiatives, and will he actually take such initiatives?
Okay, thank you. Then I have Adam, and then lastly, Karen, please. Karen Messon. So, Adam, please.
Thank you very much, James. Just very briefly, as we're looking to move forward constructively, I wonder what advice you could give on how we can frame the debate using around the term strategic autonomy, so that it doesn't become a point of friction and seen as Europe going alone after we've been complaining for the last 4 years of America going alone. How can we work together to make Europe playing a fuller part as a fully autonomous, fully competent and reliable partner going forward? What language could we use? What arguments can we use going forward? Thank you.
Right, Karen, and then I'm afraid I do have to put in one last one to John Wyles. He's our rapporteur. So then we'll close off then, Wendy, and then over to you. Karen, please, next.
Thank you very much. I mean, this is linking to previous comment from Ambassador Shermar to Knut. I mean, we welcome last week Commission communication on the new EU-US agenda, calling for bigger cooperation on shared values, on aligned objectives. I mean, we support this cooperation, be it on taxation or actually regulating digital economy. We think it's very important because actually all the economies are trying to recover from the pandemic, and digital investment is key to that. So my question, Ambassador, is, do you believe that the Biden administration will prioritize developing common global digital regulation with the EU? Thank you.
Right, and lastly, and not least, John, you are the author of our interim report on the TPN papers. Would you like to ask your closing question, please?
Thank you. Hello, Wendy, and good to hear you again. Thanks for an excellent presentation. I've just been reading a document from NATO, produced by a group of experts, wise people for Stoltenberg, and focused on Agenda 2030, imitation being, as it were, a sincere form of flattery. I like the sound of it, I like the look of it, but I'm totally confused as to how America is going to manage the relationship, or rather the non-relationship, the weak relationship between the EU and NATO, when both are, it seems to me, committed to similar goals and objectives, but which do not, of course, enjoy overlapping membership. Is there enough bandwidth in Washington? Is there enough diplomatic capacity to run two relationships in a new partnership towards shared objectives?
We might need more than an hour to answer that one, Wendy, but over to you, please.
So, let me say a few final comments, trying to wrap in all the questions that just got asked. First of all, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for the Biden administration. I'm not part of it. So I just want to make that clear. So I'm interpreting to you what I have heard, conversations I've had, what I know is going on, but I'm not here as a spokesperson for the Biden administration. That said, there is no question that the president-elect and the Secretary of State designate have as a first priority reestablishing our alliance with Europe. And that means a recommitment of the US-EU relationship and a recommitment of the US-NATO relationship. You all know that Joe Biden is a committed Europeanist and committed to NATO. So, John, I don't see a choice but to have strong relationships both with the European Union and with NATO, even given the complexity. But my goodness, there are issues that are much more complex than those relationships. There's no question that Europe's interests and the United States' interests on all subjects are not identical, but they are overlapping. And we all will have to understand where, in fact, Europe needs to act autonomously from the United States, where the United States must act autonomously from Europe. But I have no doubt that our shared values, our shared interests are much stronger than our differences. We absolutely have to figure our way forward on technology and on the digital economy. It is a crucial priority for the jobs of the future and the economy of the future. So that it is high on your agenda is fantastic and fundamental to what we will have to do together, what we will have to sort through together, including what we do on 230 and what the regulatory framework for our technology companies is going to be. That said, the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act yesterday, with enough votes to override the president's veto, means that 230 will be put off for another day, I believe. But we'll see. The veto hasn't happened, the override hasn't happened, and Congress is in pretty much for just one more week. Finally, we will work together on a strategy for China, because unless we work together, we will undermine the strength of our ability to do it together. And so whether it is on COVID and the world, on digital economy, on democracy, we will be stronger together than we will be apart. And so I guess the message that I most want to relay today, from everything I have heard and everything I've seen and everything I know of the president-elect, the vice president-elect, the Secretary of State designate, and all of the other senior leadership that's being identified, is that reestablishing a strong, vibrant, and full relationship with Europe is job one.
Wendy, listen, how can we thank you enough for that extraordinarily clear and wonderfully warm kind of message that you've given us today? It's as if we're at the beginning of a Grand Prix, the lights were all red, suddenly they're all green, and we have to put our foot on the accelerator and make sure that we can win together. So thank you very much indeed for coming. And by the way, you have the most magnificent husband who we all adore, of course, and so Bruce, I think he must be somewhere on the system here. We'd like to say thanks very much to both of you for all your interest, support, and enthusiasm for what is now going to be becoming a coming decade of transatlanticism. Thanks very much, Wendy.
Thank you all. Take care. Have a good rest of your day. Mine's just getting underway.
Absolutely. Well, you take care and keep well. Yeah, bye. So I hand over to Jeffries now, please, to go on to the next session.